Hidden in the mist-wrapped peaks of the Carpathian Mountains lived a people who carried ancient secrets in their blood, secrets that Europe's greatest powers tried to erase forever. When officials conducted censuses of the Carpathian region in the 19th century, they discovered something unexpected in the mountain valleys. Entire communities spoke a dialect that baffled linguists, practiced Christianity with Byzantine rituals, and claimed they had lived in these peaks since time immemorial. The Lemkos, taking their name from the word lem, meaning only, had survived as a distinct people for over a millennium, while empires rose and fell around their mountain strongholds. But their greatest test came on April 28, 1947, when Polish communist authorities decided this ancient people had no place in the modern world. This is the story of how modern science is revealing the true origins of Europe's most persecuted mountain tribe. The story of the Lemkos begins with waves of medieval migration that shaped the genetic landscape of the Carpathian highlands. Between the 14th and 16th centuries, three distinct groups settled in these mountain valleys, creating the unique population that would become the Lemko people. Slovak and German colonists arrived from the southwest, bringing alpine farming techniques and settling in the Transcarpathian regions. German and Polish settlers moved in from the northwest, establishing communities along major river valleys. The final wave carried East Slavic populations and Wallachian herders eastward into the higher peaks, where they mixed with existing communities. This genetic blending created a people perfectly adapted to mountain life, preserving cultural traits from multiple European populations. The mountain terrain dictated their way of life. Lemkos developed specialized knowledge of alpine agriculture, animal husbandry, and seasonal migration patterns. They practiced transhumance, moving livestock between valley pastures and highland meadows according to ancient cycles. Traditional occupations included lumbering, woodworking, and textile production, with Lemko crafts becoming renowned in regional markets. The mountain environment that protected them also isolated them, allowing unique linguistic and genetic features to develop over centuries, while European lowland populations experienced constant mixing and change. The Lemko dialect that emerged from this mixing process preserves linguistic features lost elsewhere in Europe. Their language contains specialized vocabulary relating to alpine agriculture, mountain weather patterns, and Byzantine religious practices not found in surrounding dialects. Unlike standard Ukrainian or Polish, Lemko dialects retained archaic verb forms and borrowed extensively from Hungarian, Slovak, and Romanian through centuries of mountain trade. The way Lemkos pronounced lem immediately identified them to outsiders as members of this mountain community. But language alone didn't define Lemko identity. It was the powerful combination of their unique dialect with their distinctive religious practices that created an unbreakable cultural bond. Lemko communities built wooden churches with a distinctive architectural signature: 3 golden cupolas, with the highest dome positioned over the entrance rather than the altar. These structures used traditional Carpathian building techniques that created a distinctive appearance in the mountain landscape. Inside these churches, Byzantine liturgies were conducted in Church Slavonic, mixed with Lemko dialect, creating a worship experience found nowhere else in Europe. Their religious practices followed Eastern Orthodox traditions while maintaining local customs that had developed in the mountain communities. This fusion of language and faith created what scholars call an ethno-religious identity, where speaking Lemko and practicing Byzantine Christianity became inseparable markers of community membership. Children learned their prayers in Lemko dialect while absorbing religious concepts through their native tongue, reinforcing both linguistic and spiritual traditions simultaneously. When empires demanded assimilation, they couldn't separate these two elements. To change the language meant abandoning the faith, and vice versa. This interconnected identity system proved remarkably resistant to outside pressure, but it also made Lemkos automatic targets for any power seeking religious or linguistic uniformity. This kind of detailed cultural archaeology is exactly why we created Ancestry Code, to bring you the hidden connections that rewrite human history. If you want to uncover more secrets locked in ancient DNA, subscribe to our channel. Now onto the video. Modern genetic analysis has revealed just how unique the Lemko people truly are, carrying some of the rarest European DNA signatures ever discovered. Recent mitochondrial DNA studies reveal that Hutsul Lemko communities possess the highest H1 frequency documented in their region, a genetic marker that connects them directly to Ice Age survivors who sheltered in the Franco-Cantabrian refuge during the last glacial maximum. Other Lemko populations display mitochondrial patterns similar to Finno-Ugric peoples of the Ural Mountains, suggesting ancient connections spanning vast distances. Most significantly, Lemko communities preserve high frequencies of haplogroup I, with some populations showing rates of 11.3%. Remarkable because this represents one of Europe's oldest genetic lineages that has largely disappeared from other populations. These genetic signatures demonstrate that the Lemkos maintained prehistoric European bloodlines through geographic isolation, making their DNA valuable for tracing ancient migration patterns that occurred thousands of years before written records began. But this genetic and cultural uniqueness would make them targets as European powers began building modern nation-states that demanded ethnic and religious uniformity. The Lemko combination of Eastern Christianity and Slavic ethnicity created suspicion among Catholic Polish authorities, Orthodox Russian officials, and Protestant Austrian administrators. Each empire viewed them as potential allies of their enemies. Poland saw Russian Orthodox influence, Russia suspected Ukrainian nationalism, Austria feared Slavic separatism. Their refusal to fully assimilate into any single national identity made them perpetual outsiders in an era when states were consolidating power through cultural homogenization. The 19th century brought new pressures as the Austrian Empire sought to organize its diverse populations into manageable administrative units. Census takers struggled to classify the Lemkos, who claimed their own identity separate from Poles, Ukrainians, or Slovaks. Austrian policies initially protected religious minorities, but political tensions mounted as nationalism spread across Europe. The empire's collapse during World War I exposed mountain communities to unprecedented violence and persecution. Austrian authorities suspected Orthodox Lemko communities of Russian sympathies when the war began. Military forces established internment camps where 1,767 Lemkos perished according to camp records. Survivors returned to find their villages burned and their communities shattered by years of military occupation. The war's end brought new challenges as the newly formed Polish state inherited traumatized populations scattered across hundreds of mountain villages. Polish authorities implemented policies designed to integrate minorities into Polish Catholic culture during the interwar period. The government established Polish language schools in Lemko regions while restricting education in their native dialect. Officials promoted conversions to Roman Catholicism while restricting Orthodox religious education and closing traditional churches. State policies encouraged Polish settlement in mountain regions, diluting Lemko demographic concentration. These pressures triggered religious conflicts that divided Lemko communities between those accepting Catholic authority and those maintaining Orthodox traditions. The so-called Tylawa Schism saw entire villages reject Ukrainian Catholic priests in favor of Orthodox clergy, creating lasting divisions within families and communities. Some villages built new Orthodox churches when Catholic authorities refused to surrender existing structures. Entire villages split along religious lines as outside authorities competed for control over mountain populations. The religious divisions weakened community bonds just as an even greater threat emerged on the horizon. World War II brought unprecedented destruction to Lemko territories as German forces occupied the region. German occupation authorities deported large numbers of Lemkos to forced labor camps while Soviet forces implemented population transfer policies. By 1946, most Lemko families had been forcibly relocated, leaving only scattered communities in their ancestral mountains. The remaining population became targets of the final and most systematic attempt at cultural erasure. Polish communist planners designed Operation Vistula to eliminate potential support for Ukrainian insurgent forces operating in southeastern territories. The Ukrainian insurgent army had been conducting guerrilla warfare against Polish communist authorities, creating a security crisis in the borderlands. Although Lemkos had minimal involvement with these activities, their Orthodox faith and Slavic ethnicity made them suspects in the eyes of security officials. Communist authorities viewed all Eastern Orthodox populations as potentially disloyal to the new Polish state. The operation represented the culmination of centuries of efforts to solve the Lemko question through forced assimilation or removal. The operation began before dawn on April 28, 1947, when Polish military units surrounded Lemko villages simultaneously. Soldiers gave families just hours to pack essential belongings before loading them onto freight trains bound for Western Poland. Military forces systematically destroyed Orthodox churches, burned Lemko books, and confiscated traditional cultural items to prevent any possibility of return. Authorities deliberately scattered families across hundreds of miles to prevent community reformation in their new locations. The deportation trains carried people to former German territories where Polish authorities had already assigned Polish settlers to the best available housing. The policy succeeded in breaking cultural transmission for an entire generation as children faced punishment for speaking their native language. For decades, it seemed the Lemko people had been successfully erased from European history. Poland's democratic transition in 1989 created unexpected opportunities for cultural revival. The collapse of communist censorship allowed Lemkos to publicly discuss their history and reconnect with scattered family members. The first Lemko gathering in decades brought together thousands of people seeking to reconnect with their ancestral heritage. These annual festivals became focal points for language preservation and cultural education as scattered families rediscovered their shared identity. Older Lemkos, who had hidden their language skills for decades, began teaching younger family members words and phrases they had preserved in secret. Educational initiatives began teaching Lemko language in selected schools, while cultural organizations worked to document traditional practices before the last native speakers passed away. The Union of Lemkos and other cultural organizations established networks connecting diaspora communities across Poland and internationally. Modern translation projects, including works like The Little Prince rendered into Lemko dialect, proved the language remained viable for contemporary use. Cultural festivals now feature traditional Lemko music, dance, and crafts, attracting both ethnic Lemkos and curious tourists to mountain regions. DNA research projects have helped scattered families identify genetic relatives across continents, rebuilding connections severed by decades of forced separation. Online databases and genealogy projects have enabled Lemko descendants in North America to trace their roots back to specific mountain villages. Contemporary population estimates suggest people of Lemko descent live worldwide, with communities spanning multiple continents. Their survival demonstrates how cultural identity can transcend political borders and systematic persecution through the power of community memory. The Lemko experience reveals how small populations preserve irreplaceable genetic and linguistic diversity that enriches all of human heritage. Their unique DNA signatures maintain connections to European prehistory that would disappear without their continued existence. Modern genetic analysis confirms what Lemkos always insisted. They represent a distinct people whose survival preserves irreplaceable chapters in the human story. The mountains that once protected them may no longer provide refuge, but their genetic and cultural legacy endures in communities determined to honor their ancestors. This was Ancestry Code, and as always, thanks for watching.